far reaches of the void, where the Astronomican's light burns faint and broken, there lies a scar across the heavens, the shattered stars. To most, they are a navigational impossibility, a region whispered of only in void taverns and prayer halls. To some, they are a promise of forgotten riches, and relics older than the Imperium itself. But to those who have ventured too close and lived to tell their tale, they are something far worse. I speak to you now as one of those survivors. The maps say the shattered stars are dead systems, their suns cracked and their worlds cold. But the truth is stranger. The stars do not simply shine, they fracture. They bleed light in shards, splintering across the void like broken glass. Vox channels echo with voices you do not own. Shadows move in patterns you did not make. And sometimes the stars themselves rearrange while you watch. I was there when we found it, when greed drove us deeper, when Captain Marin swore we would plunder a prize greater than anything the cold markets could imagine. We did not find treasure. We found something else, something that was never meant to be unearthed. They said it was only a fragment, a crystal organ locked in chains, pulsing with the heartbeat of a dead god. But when the glass cracked, when the fractured light bled free, we realized the stars were not broken at all. They were eyes, watching, waiting. We thought we had claimed the relic. We thought we had survived the horrors it birthed aboard our ship. But as I stand here now, clutching this aquila and trying to steady my trembling hands, I know the truth. The shattered stars are not a place. They are a hunger. And once you hear my story, you will never look at the night sky the same way again. They say there are regions of space where light goes to die. I learned that the hard way, watching suns not dim but break, as if some colossal hand had clenched around them and squeezed until their brilliance fractured into knives. Out there, constellations are not patterns but wounds. You can plot them, chart them, name them, until you drift too close, and your lines stop matching what your eyes insist they see. We called it the shattered stars. The old void salts muttered other names. The glass grave, the prism wound, the emperor's blind side. To the pious, it was a cautionary tale. To the desperate, it was a rumor of hidden vault ships and rogue trader arcs, lost with their bellies full of gold and sins. To me, it was the place where I buried the person I used to be. My name, now, is Varos. Once I had another, stamped in neat administratum script across manifests and mess tallies aboard a Navy supply scow. That name belonged to a man who thought duty could keep him safe, that regulations could wall out the void. That name bled out in a corridor when raiders cut through our hull and taught me how thin the distance between alive and listed truly is. After that, the void gave me Varos, and I was too ashamed to argue. You want to know how I survived? You want to know if the tales are true? Let me give you a map then, one as honest as I can make it. It starts with a star field that looked wrong, even before the instruments said so. We had come in on auxiliary burn, thrusters whispering against a sea of splinters. Through the view slit above the mess, I saw pinpricks of radiance refracted into slashes, as if every point of light had been dragged sideways and left a scar. At first, I thought the viewport was crazed. Then I realized the spider webbing lay beyond the glass, written across the firmament itself. You can learn to fear the quiet of a ship too long without alarms. It means the crew have run out of curses for whatever is going wrong. Eyes away from the gods, someone muttered at my shoulder. Brel, one of the hired guns. Knuckles tattooed, teeth plated in cheap steel. He spoke like a man who'd decided not to be afraid and was doing a bad job of it. They don't like being stared at. They're not gods, I said. They're just broken stars. He snorted. You ever see a star do that and stay just a star? I didn't answer. Pride is a luxury in the void. When the cosmos starts making you feel small, you let it. Rumors traveled from mouth to mouth in that half-lit mess like contraband. A vault ship that fled a war and never made it out. An ark from the early Crusades, sealed and sanctified and left to drift. A Mechanicus reliquary that ate the crews who tried to catalogue it. Treasures, relics, promises. And always, as a footnote delivered in a lowered voice, curses, voxes unspooling your words back to you, not quite the way you said them. Auspex returns that looked like faces, until you blinked. Star maps that updated themselves while you slept and swore the route you'd charted was a lie. I told myself I didn't believe any of it. I had my rituals, the quiet ones you do when no one is watching. A thumb across the cheap Aquila in my pocket, a breath held through the burn of translation, a name whispered into the recyclers, in case some old saint was listening. Faith gets you mocked among drifters, but there's not a voidsman alive who doesn't have something they press their fear against to see if it leaves a dent. The ship was the Iron Revenant, all flaking paint and hungry engines, a blade with more nicks than edge. She flew under the command of Captain Marin, ex-Navy, so the rumors said. His coat was a Navy cut tailored to pirate swagger, a riot of stolen pins that meant nothing and everything, depending on who was looking. He had the habit of a man who'd led men into fire and come out needing to believe there was meaning in the heat. I met his eyes once in the corridor and felt weighed, measured and set aside for later. Varos, he said, as if the name were a coin he was testing. You served. Yes, Captain. And you still pray. A glance, quick as a knife, at the line where my pocket bulged with an Aquila. We'll see if that helps. I don't ask it to, I lied. He smiled like a man who had lied to himself so often he respected the craft in others. Good. Come to the chart room when you've eaten. The chart room didn't deserve the name. The hololith was mercifully dim, its projector surrounded by saints' candles, stuck to the metal with melted wax and stubbornness. Their little flames made the room feel like a shrine to forbidden geometry. Dr. Valan stood hunched over the display, a cable plugged into a socket at the base of his skull. Too many mechadendrites, too many data plates under his skin, the faint whir of servos under every breath. A heretic whose prayers were equations he refused to show anyone else. Corda, first mate, leaned against the bulkhead near the door, augmetic forearm ending in a clamp, careful eyes that never stopped moving. Isolde stood apart, half-shadowed, thin, pallid, with a suppression torque around her neck that clicked and flashed when her gaze lingered too long on anyone's face. They called her witch when they were polite, and worse when they weren't. The torque ticked again as I entered, and she looked away from me quickly, as if she'd touched something hot in my thoughts. Good, Marin said. We're all here. He gestured to the projector. Show him. The hololith woke. Space swelled into being, starlight woven into a map. At first it looked like any other chart, until Valan hissed an activation phrase, and the projection shifted. Constellations splayed, then split, each star dragged along a vector of refracted light, becoming not a point but a blade. Broken suns, a field of knives, the shattered stars, Marin said, and there was a reverence in his voice that worried me more than arrogance would have. We have a line through. No one has a line through, I said before I could stop myself. Every path is wrong by the time you finish plotting it. Valan's mechadendrites quivered, delighted. Unless you plot the shift, Voidsman. Observe another sequence of sigils, and now faint ghost lines stitched across the map, vectors leading between splinters. It hurt to look at, not because it was bright, but because it felt like it had been decided without any of us consenting. The glass grain precesses, the field fractures along predictable axes, if you understand the underlying hymn. Isolde flinched when he spoke the last word. Her talk flashed once, warning yellow. Corda's clamp scraped the bulkhead. A hymn, Merrin repeated soft. He watched Isolde as he said it, the way a man watches a storm to see where the lightning chooses to walk. Call it what you like. I call it a chart. And at its end, the projection zoomed through the blades, along tunnels of not quite empty space where normal men did not go. It resolved to an orbit around what might once have been a planet and was now a crown of debris embedded with cathedral silhouettes. In their midst, a shape that did not want to be seen. Not large, not small. Important in the way a knife is important to a throat. At its end, Merrin said again, a buried prize. A vault that never made it home. Who buried it? I asked. Someone who did not want it found, Isolde said. Her voice never rose above a murmur, but the talk flashed twice, as if to scold her for daring to speak, or someone who could not bear to carry it any further. Merrin's gaze pinned her. Can you keep your mind to yourself long enough for us to pick the Emperor's pocket? Isolde's eyes slid to me, just for a heartbeat. In it, I felt the vertigo of open space, the prickle along the spine that says, don't turn around. Then she looked at the floor. I can keep my mind, she said, and made it sound like a question. Corda pushed off the wall, the stump of his sleeve creaking where metal met scar. Captain, the crew are already on edge. Half of them won't go past the grave. Quarter won't go past the prayer hold. Past that. He lifted his clamp. They'll need more than hazard pay. They'll get more, Merrin said mildly. If their legs hold. If their hands don't shake. If their mouths stay shut. That's not what I meant, Corda said. And for a moment, something like grief crossed his face. There are places where men don't come back right. Then they'll come back wrong and richer, Merrin said, and the gentle tone was worse than a shout. We launch on my mark. Varos, you've walked Navy decks more than any of these drunk saints. You'll be in the first shuttle. You'll get me to the heart of that crown before the glass decides it wants us for altars. I should have said no. There's always a way to say no, even when there isn't. You can throw a punch and lose a tooth and spend the rest of your short life curled around the lesson. But it is a way. Instead, I nodded. Aye, Captain. He smiled again, that careful counterfeit. Good man. Dismissed. I left the candles to gutter without me and followed the thread of ship sounds back toward the mess. The Iron Revenant breathed around me. The slow exhale of the recyclers, the click of boots on magnetized deck, the creak of strained ribs as the hull politely asked to be elsewhere. Somewhere above, the great eye of the void peered through the view slit. I resisted the urge to look. Brel intercepted me near the armory. He had a stub pistol tucked into his waistband and a grin that wanted to be a warning. So, holy man, he said, you going to ask your sky god to hold your hand down there? If it listens, I said. If it doesn't, I'll hold my own. He laughed and clapped my shoulder. That's the spirit. Valan says all we have to do is walk where the song says walk. Songs go out of tune, I said. Brel's grin faltered, not because he was afraid of the thought, but because he recognized it. So do men, he said, and that was the first honest thing I'd ever heard him say. I took my kit, checked charge packs by touch, because I didn't trust my eyes with all that broken light outside. Ran my fingers across the dull metal of the carbine's casing and told my hands to stop shaking. When you're very scared, you keep your movements small. The void notices big ones. The ship-wide vox clicked alive with Merrin's voice. Calm, certain. All hands. We will be making controlled approach to the crown within the hour. First shuttle, Corda, Velan, Isolde, Brel, Varos, with me. Lock plates and bless your bolts, however you choose to bless them. If you have prayers, say them now. If you have doubts, eat them. Around me, I felt the crew stiffen, like a single muscle bracing for a blow. I found a shadow and borrowed it. Took the Aquila from my pocket. The gold was gone from it long before I touched it. It was just pressed tin pretending to be something better. I pressed it to my lips anyway. There's a power in pretending sincere enough to fool yourself. Watch us, I whispered. Or don't. But remember my name. The vox popped again. A whisper this time, not Merrin. Not any voice I knew. A fraction too slow to be an echo, and a fraction too quick to be a reply. Varos, it said, soft as frost forming. We remember. I froze. The channel hissed. The whisper was gone. Around me, men were buckling webbing and checking seals, oblivious. I told myself I was jumpy. The void talks. The void always talks. It's what it says that decides whether you live to argue. Corda's clamp banged the bulkhead outside the shuttle bay, a ship's bell in a man's arm. Load up, he barked. If you're going to piss yourself, do it before you get in my boat. I took my place on the bench. The hatch hissed. The bay rotated for launch, and the world tilted, the way it does when you are about to leave the only thing separating you from infinity. Through the porthole, the star field slid by, knives upon knives, points into blades, the graveyard crown glinting with the kind of light that is not illumination, but invitation. The shuttle's clamps released with a shudder that crawled up my spine. Brel grinned across from me. Merron's eyes were closed, his lips moving as if reciting a checklist or a prayer. Isolde's talk clicked a steady metronome only she could dance to. Velan's mechadendrites made the sign of the cog in the air, and then pretended they hadn't. We dropped toward the crown, toward the thing that didn't want to be seen and would not forgive us for seeing it. The vox in my ear popped once more. Just static, I told myself. Just static. Then, from somewhere far beneath the fractured suns, something sang back. The Iron Revenant was a ship that never forgot what it had been. Once, she had been a Navy patrol frigate, lean and predatory, her hull proud with the sigils of the Emperor's fleets. Now her plates were patched with scavenged scrap, her prows blackened from fire she had not the purity to cleanse. But in the corridors, beneath the flickering lumen strips and rusted piping, you could still feel the echo of what she had been. A vessel that hunted with sanction, not hunger. And like the Revenant, her crew carried their ghosts. Captain Merrin was a man who wore his past as armor. His greatcoat still bore imperial rank pins, scratched, dulled, half torn away. But he polished the ones that remained until they gleamed like trophies. He kept his posture square, his voice calm, his words like blade edges honed too often. He was a man obsessed with proving the void had not broken him, obsessed with chasing the glimmer of lost power, obsessed with holding together a ship and crew that would have devoured each other without him. Every glance of his grey eyes weighed you, found you wanting, and filed you away for when he needed something expendable. At his side, looming always like a shadow, was Corda, first mate. His augmetic claw arm ended in a pincer that clicked when he was impatient. The rest of him was slabs of scar tissue and muscle. He didn't speak often, but when he did, you listened, because his words were always accompanied by the cold reminder of how easily he could silence you forever. Corda was Merrin's dog, and his chain both, brutal, unyielding, and utterly loyal to the captain, who had saved him from some forgotten penal colony. Then there was Isolde, pale as frost, slight as a shadow, eyes too large in her gaunt face. The suppression talk locked tight around her throat sparked faintly, runes glowing whenever her thoughts strayed where they shouldn't. They called her witch, half in fear, half in mockery. No one sat too close to her in the mess. No one spoke her name above a whisper. But Maron kept her aboard, for her sight slipped into cracks where maps failed, and her whispers sometimes warned of dangers seconds before they struck. She never laughed. She barely even blinked. When she looked at me, I felt as though she were reading the scars on my soul. Dr. Valen was worse. The Mechanicus would have called him Heertek. Out here, he was just useful. Too many mechadendrites twitched and coiled from the hunch of his back, each tipped with a tool or needle that clicked with hungry precision. His flesh was pale and stretched thin over augmetic frames, his voice buzzing with vox feedback when he forgot to tune his throat box. He had abandoned Mars's dogma long ago, replacing the Omnissiah with a gospel only he could calculate. He spoke of equations that could map hunger, of hymns written in starlight. The crew tolerated him because the Iron Revenant still flew, and because no lock, no machine, no cogitator resisted his caress for long. Then came the mercenaries, Brel and Santh. Brel, with his plated teeth and tattooed knuckles, laughed too loud at every story and carried 3 knives more than he needed. He hid fear behind bravado, but I saw the way his eyes lingered on shadows too long, the way his fingers twitched near his trigger even when nothing moved. Santh was quieter, meaner. He played with his stub revolver the way a gambler plays with dice, spinning its cylinder with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Both of them were greedy, reckless, the kind of men who would shoot you in the back if the pay was right, unless you frightened them more than you tempted them. And then there was me, Varos, once a Navy voidsman, now just another drifter pressed into service because Maron needed someone who could still read Imperial schematics. I kept my Aquila hidden in my pocket, rubbing its worn edges when no one was looking. They mocked me for it when they noticed. Faith had no place among outcasts, they said, but I had learned long ago that the void hears everything, and I'd rather whisper to the Emperor than leave my thoughts bare to what else might be listening. The crew moved like predators, forced into a cage together. Every mess meal was a test of dominance, every corridor exchange a silent measure of strength. And yet, under Maron's command, they obeyed. They cursed him, feared him, envied him, but none doubted him. He held them by the throat with one hand and led them with the other, always dangling the promise of something greater, a prize worth the risk, a treasure worth the nightmares. That prize lay ahead, beyond the safe glow of the Astronomicon, in the heart of the shattered stars. When the order came to translate, I was strapped into my harness in the crew hold, knuckles white on the restraints. The lumen strips flickered overhead as the navigator, an old trembling husk swaddled in stained robes, began to chant. The air shuddered with warp pressures. The hull groaned like a dying beast, and then the familiar wrench of unreality dragged us screaming through the veil. But this translation was not like others. The light of the Astronomicon, distant, faint, yet always steady, barely reached here. Instead of the golden warmth of the Emperor's beacon, only a fractured glow bled through, like the radiance of a lamp seen through shattered glass. It flickered, it cut, it felt wrong. The crew whispered oaths and curses as the Iron Revenant emerged into the region. Through the portholes, I saw them, the shattered stars, suns split apart into shards, bleeding prisms across the void. Constellations broken and scattered, their light refracted into wrong shapes. It was not like looking at the heavens. It was like staring at a wound in reality itself. Beautiful, isn't it? Maren said, striding through the hold as if the warp itself bent to his will. His voice was calm, steady, cutting through the hush. The Imperium fears what it cannot name. But we claim it. No one answered. Not Brel, not Santh, not even Corda. Even Valan's mechadendrites twitched uneasily, as if tasting a frequency they did not want. Only Isolde spoke, so softly I thought at first I had imagined it. The stars are not broken. They are watching. Her talk sparked once, warning, and she flinched. But the words hung in the silence like frost. I gripped the Aquila in my pocket until the edges cut my palm, because for the first time since I had joined the Iron Revenant, I believed her. And deep inside me, a truth settled like lead. Whatever waited for us in that wound of light, we were already too close to turn back. The Iron Revenant drifted deeper into the region where sane men turned their ships away. Each pulse of the engines seemed to echo too long, reverberating as if the void itself had grown cavernous. Even the hull sang differently here, an undertone, not metal against stress, but like a voice caught in the plating, whispering with every vibration. At first, the anomalies came subtle. The vox began to stutter with echoes. Orders repeated themselves seconds after being spoken, warped and stretched. "Seal hatch 3, Corda barked. And then, a heartbeat later, his voice returned over the vox, identical in tone but pitched just enough higher to feel wrong. Some crewmen muttered it was simple feedback. Others fell silent, eyes flicking toward the walls, as though listening for the one voice that wasn't an echo at all. The Auspex was worse. Valan had been glued to the screen since translation, mechadendrites twitching like a nest of snakes. Now he hissed and clicked with mounting excitement. "Impossible," he buzzed. "Repeat, impossible. The constellations realign every 73 seconds. No, 72.8. Fracture vectors consistent. Shifting shards of light across non-linear axes. It is a map being rewritten before us." I leaned over his shoulder despite myself. On the Auspex, the stars twisted like shards of glass tumbling in slow water, breaking apart and recombining into constellations that had no business existing. For a moment, I swore I saw the Aquila traced in those shifting lines. Then it fractured into a spiral that writhed like something alive. I stepped back, bile rising in my throat. The crew began to argue. "It's a curse," spat Santh, spinning the cylinder of his revolver nervously. "The light itself is bent. No chart can guide through this." Maron's voice cut across the hold, calm and sharp as ever. "The chart can. My chart." "You're mad," Santh snapped, reckless enough to forget who he spoke to. "No one's ever made it past the prayer hold. Even the Mechanicus scrubbed their records past this point." Brel laughed too loudly, knuckles white on his knife hilt. "Afraid of stars? You'll shoot shadows before we even find the vault. Better to turn back than share the spoils with a coward." The tension thickened like oil. Corda stepped forward, clamp raised, his presence alone enough to silence Santh before the mercenary said something that would leave him headless. The first mate's gaze swept across the crew, daring them to test Maron's word. "The vault is real," Maron said, softer now, and it was worse than shouting. His scarred face was illuminated by the fractured starlight through the viewport, making his eyes gleam like cold silver. A rogue trader vessel, lost centuries ago, its belly filled with plunder from worlds the Imperium no longer remembers. And he spread his hand toward the shifting map. "I have the hymn that guides us to it." "Hymn," Isolde murmured from her corner. Her talk sparked faintly, runes glowing warning red. Not a chart, not a map, a song written in the death cries of broken suns. The talk sparked harder. She flinched, biting off whatever more she had meant to say. But the words lingered in me, coiling like smoke. A hymn. The others muttered. Fear, greed, half-hearted prayers. But Meron's conviction was contagious, and one by one, they bowed their heads, silent or sullen, until no one dared contradict him. Only Sant's hand twitched near his revolver, and only Isolde's hollow eyes met mine in the flickering gloom. I looked away, because every time I gazed out the viewport, I felt it, watched. Not like the way a predator watches prey, not even like a god judging a mortal. It was the suffocating pressure of countless unseen eyes, endless shards of broken suns tilting like glass knives toward my soul. They didn't just shine, they searched. More than once, I pressed the Aquila in my pocket so hard it cut into my palm, just to feel something human. It didn't help. The stars still shifted, the echoes still whispered, and every time Meron smiled at his chart, I knew we were walking willingly into the mouth of something waiting to close. I told myself it was just fear, just void sickness, just the nerves of a man too long away from the Emperor's light. But the void has ways of teaching liars the truth. We saw it first as a shadow against the fractured suns, an outline where no light dared to pass. Then the Auspex caught it, and our breath caught with it. The hulk drifted, vast and obscene, its hull fused with crystalline debris from a shattered planetoid. The stone and steel had grown together in impossible ways. Jagged ridges of rock pierced armored plating. Spires of crystal jutted through ruined decks, refracting starlight into colors that didn't exist on any sane spectrum. Reds that bled like opened arteries, blues that hummed in your teeth, greens that crawled beneath your eyelids and refused to leave. The silhouette was jagged, cathedral spires bent into wrong star shapes, great towers, broken domes, shattered arches stretched like frozen screams across the void. It was not a ship, it was a mausoleum, and it was waiting for us. Emperor's bones, Brel whispered beside me, his laughter gone for once. His plated teeth glinted in the fractured light, but his grin was hollow. What in the throne's name could live through that? Something worth dying for, Captain Meron said quietly, almost reverently. His eyes gleamed silver in the light, cold and hungry. A silence fell across the hold. Even Sant's revolver stilled in his twitching hands. The Auspex sputtered static. Valan muttered equations under his breath, mechadendrites writhing like agitated serpents. Hull integrity compromised. Organic intrusion. Stone metal interface. Radiation inconsistent. Warp resonance. Unquantifiable. Glorious. Warp resonance, I echoed, but no one answered. The Vox crackled, voices overlapping. Our own, but delayed, repeated, fractured. Boarding. 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 Each syllable overlapped the last until it became a chant, our voices echoing as if shouted by 1,000 mouths buried inside the hull. Meron rose to his full height. We board. Corda, Isolde, Valan, Varos, and one of the mercenaries. The rest hold here. Not me, Sant said quickly, shaking his head. You won't drag me into that grave. Send Brel. Brel laughed, too loud, too sharp. Gladly. Better me than you, coward. His eyes flicked to Meron. I'll bring back the vault keys myself. Corda's claw clicked shut with finality. Enough. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry, my knuckles white on the harness straps. This was the moment. The line between rumor and nightmare. I wanted to refuse, to beg Meron to let me stay on the Revenant, but I remembered the chart room, his eyes weighing me like a coin. Refusal meant airlock or blade. Survival meant obedience. So I nodded. Aye, Captain. The shuttle bay stank of recycled air and oil. We strapped in, each of us silent except for Valan's muttering and the faint clicks of Isolde's talk. Through the shimmer of void shields, I saw the hulk loom closer, each twisted spire clearer, each crystalline vein more alive. The shuttle's clamps released with a shudder. Engines flared. We fell toward the derelict like carrion toward a corpse. Static filled the Vox. Not feedback. Voices. Our own layered atop one another, syllables distorted and delayed, echoing until it sounded like a choir of drowned men trying to mimic our speech. Revenant away team, team, team. My stomach clenched. I glanced at Isolde. She sat very still, her pale eyes fixed on the view slit. Her lips moved soundlessly. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, forgetting my Vox carried the words. Her gaze turned to me, sharp as a blade. The talk sparked red. "They hear us," she murmured. Corda's claw slammed against the bulkhead. Silence. But silence was impossible, because in that moment the derelict itself seemed to open its mouth, fractured light bleeding across its jagged silhouette, and I swore that the spires tilted as if craning toward us. The shuttle engines screamed. The hulk filled the viewport, and as we crossed into its shadow, every lumen flickered out, leaving us with nothing but the glow of shattered suns refracted through crystal veins, painting our faces in colors that should never touch human skin. The Vox whispered one last time, our voices twisted into something not our own. "Welcome." The breach yawned wide before us, an open wound in the hull. Metal was torn back in jagged ribbons, fused seamlessly with veins of crystal that glowed faintly with the fractured light of the shattered stars. It wasn't just a hole. It was as if the ship had been torn apart and then healed by something that had no right to mend it. Corda went first, his clamp scraping against the ragged edges. Then Meron, pistol drawn, his coat shifting like a shadow behind him. I followed, pulse hammering in my ears. The hiss of my rebreather was too loud in my own skull. We stepped inside, and the silence was absolute. Not the silence of a dead vessel, but the silence of a cathedral at the moment of prayer. Heavy, reverent, suffocating. Our helmet lamps cut through the dark, beams slicing into motes of crystalline dust that drifted like glittering ash. Every particle caught the light and fractured it, scattering rainbows that slithered across bulkheads and floors. But the rainbows weren't right. They bent the wrong way. They crawled against the surfaces instead of dispersing. And then we saw the first of the dead. At first glance, I thought the body had been pinned to the bulkhead by shrapnel. Then I realized the truth. The man had been fused into the wall itself. His face was half screaming, half frozen in glass, his arm jutting out at an impossible angle, petrified mid-reach. His flesh had become translucent in patches, veins of crystal running through muscle and bone, rooting him in place forever. I bit back bile. Brel muttered a curse. Valan only leaned closer, mechadendrites twitching as if eager to prod the corpse. "Beautiful," he whispered, Vox-grated voice trembling with awe. The union of matter, flesh transmuted by resonance. I must touch it and lose the hand, Corda growled, raising his clamp. Valan hissed but recoiled. We pressed on. More bodies emerged in the glow of our lamps. Some wore the red-trimmed robes of the Mechanicus, cog insignia still faintly visible beneath layers of crystalline intrusion. Others bore the tattered heraldry of rogue traders, faded aquilus, broken sigils, once proud coats of arms now warped into grotesque mosaics where crystal had devoured cloth and flesh alike. Everywhere, the dead had been melted into the ship itself. Faces peered from walls, mouths stretched open in silent hymns. Arms protruded from the floor, fingers frozen mid-grasp. Some corpses had been split down the middle, half flesh, half mineral, as though caught in the instant of transformation. My helmet beam flickered across a cracked Aquila badge lying in the dust. I stooped and picked it up, brushing crystalline ash from its surface. The symbol was fractured, the twin-headed eagle cleaved nearly in two. Its once gold surface was dull, flaking, one wing warped as though it had tried to escape the badge itself. For a moment, it felt like a comfort, proof that the Emperor's light had once reached even here. Then dread seeped in, because if his symbol could be broken, what hope did I have clutching my own tin trinket? I tucked the badge into a pouch anyway. Survival makes you cling to even the smallest lies. Our helmet lamps played tricks in the crystalline dust, each beam refracted, casting multiple shadows of our bodies against the walls. Shadows that lagged a fraction of a second behind our movements. Shadows that sometimes twitched when we stood still. "Captain," Brel whispered, his voice shaky through the vox. "This place, it's not just dead. It's listening." "Stay sharp," Marin said, unflinching, his calm cut like ice. Then Isolde spoke, her voice low, almost reverent. "They're still praying." We all froze. Her pale eyes were wide, unfocused, her lips trembling as if caught between fear and awe. I hear them. Not voices, not echoes. Prayers. Please. From the walls her talk sparked once, twice, punishing her for speaking. But she didn't stop. They begged for salvation, and no one came. Her words crawled down my spine like ice water. I wanted to snap at her, to silence her, but I couldn't. Because in that moment, as the crystalline dust swirled around us and the corpses stared with glassy eyes, I swore. I felt the air vibrating in my ears. Not sound, not words, just resonance. A rhythm that might have been voices too faint to hear, carried in the bones of the ship. Prayers that would never end. I gripped my carbine tighter and whispered a prayer of my own, though the words came hollow, brittle, breaking apart even as I spoke them. And as we advanced deeper into that tomb, the shadows followed a heartbeat behind us, like mourners at a procession. The further we pushed, the less the ship resembled anything human hands had built. The passageways buckled and bent, bulkheads flowing around crystalline veins, as though the metal had softened like wax and been pulled into shapes it was never meant to hold. We reached what must once have been a habdeck. Now it looked like a fever dream. Bunks and tables had fused with outgrowths of crystal, forming grotesque mockeries of furniture. A chair sprouted a vein of quartz like a spine, stabbing upward into the ceiling. A mess table had become a single slab of glimmering stone, half a body still slumped across it, the face buried forever in the surface, as though swallowed by quicksand. Crystalline veins crawled along the walls like frozen lightning. Some glowed faintly from within, pulsing like veins carrying blood. I tried not to look too long. Every time the glow throbbed, I felt my own pulse stumble in time with it. "Ship's log," Valen croaked, a mechadendrite pointing to a cogitator unit encrusted with stone. He scuttled forward, fingers twitching with excitement. Sparks flared as he forced a connection, coaxing data through systems that should have been long dead. A dim glow flickered across his retinal display. His jaw quivered as fragmented text scrolled across his eyes. "Entry recovered," he rasped. "Hear this." His voice shifted, reading aloud in a broken monotone. "Artifact retrieved from dead world in the Crown system. Prism Heart, source of illumination. Crew uneasy. Dreams darken. Visions of fracture." Static ripped the words apart, then the log resumed. Madness spreading. Engineers speak in tongues. Disciples claim the heart sings to them. Mechanicus adepts sealed it within vault. Then only garbled nonsense. Prism Heart. Merrin's eyes lit with obsession. There. Proof. It's proof of a curse, I snapped before I could stop myself. They sealed it away for a reason. Or to keep it for themselves, Merrin countered smoothly. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. The greater the warnings, the greater the prize. Santh snorted. A singing heart, madness in dreams, fairy tales for children. Only thing cursed here is our wasted time. His grin was sharp, forced. He tapped the side of his head. See? Still sane. But his revolver hand twitched as he spoke. His eyes darted to shadows that didn't move. His lips twitched, murmuring words none of us could hear. Stop muttering, Corda growled. Santh blinked, startled. I wasn't. We all heard it then. A faint whisper, distant yet close, threading through our vox. Not words, just a susurrus, like the sound of 1,000 voices praying beneath the floor. Shadows, Brel said suddenly, voice cracking. Look. I turned. Our helmet lamps cast long beams, but the shadows they made were wrong. My own silhouette lagged behind a heartbeat, moving after me like a puppet on a string. Corda's shadow twitched when he was still, its claw snapping open and shut in silent rhythm. Behind Isolde, I swore I saw a second shadow peel loose for an instant, before snapping back into place. The corridor itself seemed to bend as we walked. Walls stretched, curving subtly, until I wasn't sure if we had turned or not. A doorway we passed twice was etched with the same numbers, though I knew we hadn't circled. My vox crackled. A voice spilled through. My voice. Turn back, it whispered. Please, turn back. I froze. The others hadn't reacted. It had only spoken to me. Isolde's eyes found mine, pale, hollow, knowing. They remember, she said softly. Her talk sparked violently, making her wince, but she didn't break eye contact. Merrin raised his pistol, sweeping the corridor. His face was taut with focus, but his voice was steady, unnervingly steady. No turning back. Not now. Not when we are this close. His words should have anchored me, but instead they hollowed me out. Because I realized then, Merrin was no longer steering us to a prize. He was steering us into a nightmare, and he wanted it. And the nightmare was waiting. It began as a sound too faint to name. We had been moving down a corridor lined with veins of quartz, our helmet lamps casting fractured light that seemed to writhe across the surfaces. Then I heard it, skittering. Not footsteps, not claws, but like shards of glass sliding against each other in the dark. Did you hear? I started. Before I could finish, Santh spun, revolver raised, sweat fogging the inside of his visor. Something's in the walls, he hissed. I saw it move. Hold your fire, Corda barked. His claw snapped open and shut, the sound sharp in the heavy silence. It's nothing but echoes, but it wasn't nothing. I saw it too, just for a moment. Something darting behind the fractured reflections. A blur of pale movement flickering from one shard to the next, always at the edge of sight. Santh snapped. He roared wordlessly and fired. The first shot ricocheted, sparking across the crystal. The second and third ricocheted too, light bending with each impact. On the fourth shot, the entire corridor screamed. The sound wasn't mechanical. It wasn't feedback. It was a psychic shriek that rattled my teeth and pierced my skull, a sound that was less heard than felt. Every vein of crystal along the walls pulsed with blinding light, as though Santh's shots had awoken something buried within, and then it stepped out. From the refracted surfaces, a shape pulled itself into being, eyeless, humanoid, but jagged. Its limbs were too long, its body segmented like broken glass glued together. Where its head should have been, there was only a single vertical maw, splitting its torso from collarbone to navel, lined with splintered teeth. Each breath it exhaled came out as a hiss of grinding crystal. Santh screamed. He emptied his revolver into it, each round shattering fragments off its surface. But the shards didn't fall. They reattached themselves, crawling back into place, as if the creature refused to stay broken. It lunged. One arm, bladed like a shard, punched through Santh's chest plate. His scream cut short. His body convulsed, blood globules floating in the low gravity as the creature lifted him effortlessly off the ground. The maw opened wide, splitting further, and with a sickening crunch, it closed around him. Half his body disappeared in a single bite. His legs twitched once, then were still. The thing dropped what was left, a ruined husk, onto the deck. Crystal growths were already sprouting from the corpse, rooting him to the floor. We froze, stunned, until Corda roared, "Move!" We ran. No one argued, no one looked back. Meron shoved past me, pistol flashing in the dark. Brel cursed like a madman, knife forgotten in his grip. Valan's mechadendrites flailed as he scrambled to keep up. I gripped my carbine so tightly, my hands ached. But I didn't fire. Because I knew, every shot risked making the ship scream again. We fled down a twisting corridor, shadows splitting and reforming at our heels. My lungs burned, my heart hammered, every step ringing too loud in the silence. Behind us, the crystalline hiss of the creature echoed, closer and closer. We didn't stop until we reached a junction where the quartz veins thinned and the shadows no longer twitched. Only then did we pause, gasping, shivering, helmets fogged with breath. Isolde was the first to speak. Her voice was thin, brittle. "That wasn't alive." Corda snarled, blood-flecked spittle hitting the inside of his visor. It tore him in half. Her pale eyes flicked to him, unblinking. It wasn't alive. It was a shard, given form, a piece of something greater. Her talk sparked, punishing her words, but she didn't flinch. Meron said nothing. He only stared into the darkness we'd fled, his face lit by the fractured glow, a terrible hunger glinting in his eyes. I realized then, we hadn't just boarded a dead ship. We had stepped into something that remembered being alive, and now it knew we were here. The corridors funneled us downward, deeper into the bowels of the derelict. Here, the air felt colder, thinner, as if the void itself was seeping in through the fractures of the ship. Our boots clicked against the deck, the sound dull, swallowed almost instantly by the oppressive silence. Each step carried us closer to something the vessel seemed both to protect and to loathe. At last we found it. A vault. The doors were monumental, layered with plasteel and adamantine plating, their surface carved with twin patterns of faith and machine. Ecclesiarchal sigils burned faintly against the gloom. Purity seals long blackened, ink faded to illegibility. Beside them were Mechanicus wards, etched in binary script and reinforced with circles of cog and flame. Two faiths that rarely worked in tandem had once agreed on this. Whatever lay beyond needed to be bound. Corda dragged his claw across the surface, sparks spitting where metal met metal. This isn't storage. This is a prison. Valan practically quivered with glee, his mechadendrites caressing the ruined seals. Containment. Yes, the reinforcement is layered, redundant. Ecclesiarchal wards to bind the immaterial. Mechanicus circuits to suppress the material. This is no simple vault. This is a reliquary, a cage. Isolde's eyes flicked toward the cracked seam running down the center of the door. The metal had been stressed, warped by some immense force, leaving just enough of a gap to glimpse faint light pulsing within. She spoke in little more than a whisper. "The song is louder here." Her talk flared, runes sparking crimson, but she didn't recoil. She only tilted her head, as though listening to something we could not hear. Brel swore under his breath. "Emperor's mercy. Look at it. Still sealed, and it's glowing." Maron said nothing. His eyes fixed on the seam, his breath slow and measured. He drew his glove across the door, as though it were the surface of an altar. "Captain?" I asked, unable to mask the dread in my voice. His expression didn't change. "Open it." Valen was already at work, mechadendrites hissing as they plugged into half-dead ports and scraped along the lock rings. Sparks flared as sacred circuits screamed in protest. The heretic's lips twisted in something that might have been pain or ecstasy as the ancient wards gave way. "The machine's spirits resist," he croaked, "but they are weak, forgotten. We shall command them anew." The seals groaned. The doors shifted, grinding against crystal veins that had grown into their edges. With a final shriek of tortured metal, they cracked wider, exhaling a breath of air that smelled of dust, rust, and something sweetly rotten. Our helmet lamps pierced the chamber within. It was vast, circular, its walls encrusted with crystal veins like frozen rivers, glimmering faintly with inner light. Chains stretched across the chamber, anchored deep into the walls, converging on a raised dais at the center. And on that dais lay the sarcophagus. It was crystalline, like a coffin carved from a single monstrous jewel. Runes glowed faintly along its edges, a patchwork of Imperial Gothic, Martian Benaric, and symbols I didn't recognize. Curves that hurt to look at, lines that seemed to bend in more dimensions than they should. The sarcophagus pulsed faintly, as though something inside was breathing. Within its translucent walls, I glimpsed it, the Prism Heart. At first glance, it resembled a massive organ, vaguely heart-shaped, but faceted, crystalline, its surfaces fractured into endless angles that caught and refracted light into a spectrum that shimmered wrong. With every pulse, shards of color flared across the chamber, dancing across our armor, staining our faces. It was chained down, wrapped in thick bindings etched with wards. Purity seals hung tattered, their wax cracked and their ink faded. Some runes still glowed faintly, flickering in defiance, but others had guttered long ago. My stomach clenched, my head swam. Staring at the heart was like staring into the fractured suns outside, too bright, too wrong, too alive. I felt the shards beyond the hull press into me, their broken light echoing in the pit of my skull. I gagged into my rebreather, bile burning the back of my throat. Maron stepped forward, transfixed. His eyes shone like a zealot's. "The prize," he breathed. "The heart of the vault." Isolde's whisper slithered through the vox, barely audible. Not a heart. A shard. A fragment. Her gaze locked on mine, pale and unblinking. It was never meant to be taken. Her talk sparked violently, sending a jolt through her frame, but she did not look away. I pressed my aquila against my palm until the edges bit my skin. But for the first time, it didn't steady me. It only trembled with me. The Prism Heart pulsed again, and in the silence of the vault, I swore I heard something stir. For a long moment, none of us moved. We stood around the sarcophagus like penitents before an altar, each of us seeing something different in the fractured glow. To Maron, it was salvation. To Valen, revelation. To Brel, riches. To me, it was death waiting to be unbound. Then Valen's mechadendrites twitched, eager as starving snakes. With a wet rasp, they extended toward the chains. "Stop!" I hissed before I realized I'd spoken. My voice cracked through the vox, too loud in the suffocating chamber. "Don't touch it." Valen turned, eyes glimmering with unholy light from his retinal displays. "You do not understand. These seals are failing already. They want to be opened. They were put here to bind it," I shot back, forcing strength into my tone. "To contain it." Isolde's whisper joined mine, barely audible, but clear. "It's not just tainted. It's a shard, a piece of something greater. The heart sings because it remembers the rest of itself." Her talk flared red, sparks crawling across the metal, but she did not falter. "If you break those seals, Captain, you invite the whole into this place." Maren's jaw tightened. He did not look at her. His eyes were fixed on the crystalline coffin. "If it's part of something greater, then the greater prize waits for us to claim. We will not turn away." Corda stepped forward, clamp snapping shut with finality. "She's right about the danger." He turned, fixing Maren with his single good eye. "But so is Valen. Captain, the crew followed you here for the promise of a prize. You've shown it to us. Now take it, or they'll tear each other apart with fear and doubt." Brel barked a laugh, but it was thin, high, more panic than mirth. "He's right. You think I bled for nothing? Think Santh died for nothing? We didn't crawl through this charnel pit to leave the prize in its cage." "Prize?" My voice was raw. I took a step forward. Aquila clutched tight in my hand. "Look at it. Look at the way the light bends, the way the walls breathe. You saw what killed Santh. You think that was chance? This..." I jabbed a trembling finger at the sarcophagus. "This is what made them. This is why the ship died. This isn't treasure, it's a weapon. Or worse." The chamber began to hum. Low at first, a vibration beneath the soles of my boots, crawling up my legs, seeping into bone. The Prism Heart pulsed, each flare of fractured light brighter than the last. Shadows writhed along the walls, bending and stretching into grotesque shapes, lagging half a heartbeat behind our movements. "Captain," I whispered. Meron raised his hand, calm, commanding, unyielding. "Break the seals." "Captain." I started, but Corda's clamp snapped open and shut, warning me into silence. Valan moved. His mechadendrites hissed as cutters engaged, beams of focused heat slicing through ancient bindings. Sparks hissed across the chamber, dancing in the fractured light. The smell of scorched wax and burning wards filled the air, bitter and metallic even through my filters. The first chain fell away with a clang that echoed far too long. The hum deepened. The second chain snapped. The fractured light blazed across our visors, painting the chamber in searing reds and sickly greens. By the third, my ears rang, blood trickling from my nose beneath the helmet seal. Isolde clutched her head, talk flaring violently, her lips mouthing words she didn't choose. By the fourth, the walls themselves quivered, veins of crystal pulsing like arteries. I swore the shadows moved without us, writhing on their own. And then came the last. Valan's mechadendrite hissed through the final seal. The chain clattered to the dais. The Prism Heart pulsed with blinding light, fractured colors bursting outward in every direction, piercing us like knives. The derelict shuddered, a groan rolling through its hull like the death cry of a god. I screamed as my vision drowned in shattered rainbows. And somewhere deep in the vault, something answered. The Prism Heart's fractured light flared so bright it burned through my visor, stabbing into my skull like molten glass. I staggered, blind, choking on the hum that now roared like a chorus of broken suns. Then the walls burst. Crystalline veins shattered outward, shards exploding across the chamber in a storm of razors. From the fragments, shapes crawled into being, dozens of them, jagged mockeries of men, their limbs splintered, their torsos split by vertical maws lined with teeth of crystal. Their eyeless faces reflected us in 1,000 angles, each reflection screaming silently. "Contact!" Corda bellowed, raising his claw. The firefight erupted instantly. My Lascabine's beam splintered one creature's chest, shards flying, but the pieces only crawled back together, fusing with sickening ease. Maron's bolt pistol thundered, detonating limbs into glittering fragments, but more rose from the walls to take their place. Valan shrieked binary curses, mechadendrites flailing as he discharged arc flashes into the swarm. One of the crystalline horrors surged forward, limbs unfurling like jagged spears. With a single thrust, it impaled him clean through the chest. His scream turned to static as blood bubbled in his vox. For a heartbeat he twitched. Then the creature dragged him into the wall. His body fused mid-thrash, his face frozen in agonized awe as crystal spread through his flesh. Corda roared and hurled himself into the fray, his augmetic claw snapping and crushing. He tore one creature's arm clean off and embedded his clamp into its torso, dragging it down. But another two fell on him. Their limbs hooked through his armor, pinning him as the first creature reassembled itself around his strike. "Fight me, you bastards," he howled. His claw sheared one in half, before a jagged limb scythed through his midsection, splitting him nearly to the spine. His scream was cut short as his claw was wrenched away, torn free and absorbed into the crystalline wall, twitching grotesquely as if it still obeyed him. "Fall back." Maron's voice cut through the din, calm but furious. "Varos, Isolde, move." The sarcophagus shuddered on its dais, light flaring brighter with every pulse. Maron seized its side, dragging it with strength I hadn't thought him capable of. I threw my weight against the other handle, retching as the Prism Heart's glow gnawed at my vision. Isolde staggered beside us, blood streaming from her nose, her talk sparking violently. It's calling them, shards of itself, pulling them from the walls. The chamber convulsed, metal groaning, bulkheads folding inward as though the ship itself were shattering into mirrored fragments. Corridors bent like reflections breaking apart. We ran. Every step was a nightmare. The deck heaved, walls splitting into jagged glass that sprouted clawed horrors. They poured after us, screeching like glass breaking, a cacophony that rattled my bones. Shadows writhed across the walls, chasing faster than our feet could carry us. Brel was gone. I didn't see when or how. Perhaps the shards had taken him already. Only Maron, Isolde and I remained, dragging the cursed sarcophagus toward salvation that felt like damnation. The shuttle bay loomed ahead, its torn hull visible through the fractured corridors. The shuttle waited, clamped to the breach like a lifeboat to a sinking corpse. "Go," Maron snapped, voice hoarse, eyes wild. "On board." We hurled the sarcophagus into the shuttle's hold, scrambling after it. Shards screamed behind us, glass-limbed creatures pouring into the bay, their jagged limbs scraping sparks from the torn decking. One leapt, its maw splitting wide. Maron turned, bolt pistol roaring. The creature detonated into shards that sprayed across the bay like knives. "Launch!" he barked. I slammed the controls. The shuttle's engines howled, clamps disengaging. The vessel lurched away from the derelict, stars whipping across the view slit as the hulk shrank behind us. But even as we pulled free, I saw them. Dozens of crystalline horrors crawling across the breached hull, their bodies refracting wrong light, their screeches echoing across the void. Some leapt after us, falling short, spinning into the dark. Others clung to the derelict, watching us flee. They screamed in unison, like glass shattering inside my skull. And still the Prism Heart pulsed, glowing brighter in the shuttle's hold. As though pleased to have been carried away, the shuttle slammed into the Revenant's hangar like a corpse hurled into a coffin. The clamps seized us hard, the deck groaning under the strain. For a moment, silence. Then the bay doors ground shut, sealing us back in the thin safety of steel and recycled air. We staggered out, dragging the crystalline sarcophagus between us. Only 3 where once we had been many. Valen, gone, pierced and fused into the walls. Corda ripped apart, his augmetic claw still twitching somewhere in the derelict's belly. Santh, devoured. Brel, lost without even a scream to mark his end. The crew that met us fell into silence. They had expected survivors. They had not expected this. Eyes fell on the sarcophagus first, always on it. The Prism Heart pulsed faintly behind its fractured walls, light splintering across the hangar in colors that didn't belong. Every face that turned toward it was split into 2, 3, sometimes 4 reflections across their visors. The silence cracked. What did you bring aboard? Someone whispered. Where's Corda? Another demanded. Where's Valan? Murmurs built, fractured like the light itself, overlapping in panic. Then came the first scream. A deckhand shrieked, clawing at his faceplate. The stars! They're inside me! He tore off his helmet, eyes rolling back. Before anyone could move, he drew a blade from his belt and slit his own throat. Blood fanned into the air in a low G mist, globules catching the fractured light like rubies. His corpse floated, mouth still working silently as if trying to pray. The crew recoiled. Some cried out, others backed away, but none dared approach the sarcophagus. I clutched the Aquila in my palm until my skin broke, but even that didn't steady me. My reflection in the viewport glass twitched a heartbeat late, eyes blinking when I didn't. Behind me, I saw the whole crew mirrored wrong, their shadows jerking out of sync. The Vox crackled. Dock secure. Secure, secure. The same voice repeated, slightly higher, slightly delayed. Then lower, distorted, as if a choir of revenants were mocking us. Isolde whispered through clenched teeth, blood streaking from her nose. It's bleeding into them already. Merrin ignored her. His face was pale, scarred features lit by the pulsing glow, eyes shining with greed and hunger. He spread his hands as if presenting an offering. This relic, he said, voice calm amid the chaos, will make us rich beyond measure. The cold markets will tear each other apart to claim it. Planets will be bought, fleets raised. We will be kings among drifters. The crew's fear hung heavy in the air, but I saw it then. The way some eyes lingered on the sarcophagus, not with dread, but with temptation. Riches beyond imagining, a fortune worth damnation. And the Prism Heart pulsed again, as though answering, as though promising. I felt my stomach knot, bile rising. Because I realized then, it wasn't Merrin convincing them. It was it, and piece by piece, it was winning. The order came swift, desperate. Translation. Now, Merrin barked from the command dais, his knuckles white on the railing. The Revenant shuddered as the navigator forced the vessel toward the warp. Alarms wailed, lumen strips flickered, and the hull groaned as though reluctant to enter the Empyrean. I braced myself, whispering a prayer even as bile rose in my throat. Then the Prism Heart cracked. The sound was like glass breaking across every deck at once, a thunderclap that rattled teeth and jarred bones. Light speared out from Merrin's quarters, refracting in jagged arcs that pierced bulkheads and floors. as though the ship itself had been stabbed through. And the screams began. Crews staggered where they stood, their reflections in the viewpanes peeling away like skins shed too soon. One rating clutched his head and shrieked as crystalline veins erupted from his cheeks, forcing their way out of his mouth and eyes. His body convulsed, every limb locking as glittering spikes burst from his joints. He toppled, shattering across the deck like a broken statue. Another clutched at her chest as her armor split open, not from outside, but from within. Fragments of her ribs punched through her flak plates, already half crystallized, jagged shards spreading through her organs as though her body was nothing more than a mold for the light to fill. She collapsed, twitching, her blood spraying in crystalline filaments that hung in the air like frozen spiderwebs. The Geller field flickered. Reality folded in on itself. The lumen strips turned black, then flared with impossible colors that burned the eyes. Vox channels erupted into screams not our own, voices that belonged to no human throat. Prayers shouted backward, hymns twisted into discordant howls. Then the walls moved. They pulsed, warped, bending inward as crystalline claws forced their way through plating. The horrors we had seen on the derelict were here now, bleeding from the walls like maggots from a corpse. Their eyeless maws screeched like glass breaking, their limbs slicing through steel and flesh with equal ease. I fired without thinking, las bolts carving glowing scars across the swarm. One exploded into shards that pierced 3 crewmen in a spray of gore, embedding into their skulls. Another collapsed under Meron's bolt pistol. Its torso detonated in a rain of splinters. But for every one that fell, 2 more crawled out of the fractures. Isolde screamed. She dropped to her knees, her collar sparking furiously, smoke rising from her flesh. Blood streamed from her ears and eyes, her lips moving in whispers too fast for human speech. "They are not whole," she gasped, voice breaking. "Only shards. Shards of the greater hunger. The whole is coming." Her words tore into me worse than the screeches. Shards. If this was only fragments, what did the whole look like? A deckhand staggered toward me, clutching his belly. "Varos, help me!" His stomach swelled grotesquely, flesh splitting as crystalline limbs burst outward. His scream cut short when his face fractured, skull splitting into jagged shards. I stumbled back, bile flooding my throat, and put a shot through his chest to end him. The Geller field howled. I felt it more than heard it, a psychic keening that rattled the marrow. Then with a blinding flash, half the bridge dissolved into fractured light. Where the helmsman had been, only shards remained, floating, their edges glinting with his blood. Meron still stood. His face was illuminated by the pulsing Prism Heart through the bulkhead, light crawling across him like chains. He looked unshaken, almost exalted. "This is proof," he shouted over the din, eyes burning. "Proof of its power. With this relic, we can tear the stars themselves apart. Do you see it, Varos? Do you see?" All I saw was death. The ship groaned, its structure bending as crystalline spires pierced decks and bulkheads, warping the Revenant from within. Screams echoed down every corridor, crew dying in droves, their blood painting the walls, only for shards to crawl from their corpses. I clutched the Aquila in my trembling fist, pressing it to my chest until its edges cut me. Faith or desperation? I no longer knew the difference. But in that moment, as light fractured across the bridge and horrors poured through the walls, one truth struck me harder than any shard. We weren't fighting the monsters. We were becoming them. The Revenant was breaking apart, not in steel and rivets, but in soul. Corridors once familiar buckled into warped geometry, doors opening into places they shouldn't. Shadows lingered when their owners had passed. Whole sections of the crew had vanished into silence, their blood pooling beneath sealed hatches, while their screams echoed from bulkheads like trapped air. And through it all, Marin clung to his prize. He locked the sarcophagus in his quarters, sealing the bulkhead with every code and chain at his disposal. His orders were barked with the fury of a tyrant, his eyes bloodshot, but his hand never trembled when it touched the coffin. He carried himself like a prophet with his relic, convinced it was not just wealth, but destiny. I heard him the first time by accident. Passing his quarters, the Vox grill hissed with static. I slowed, meaning to move past, then froze at the sound of his voice. He was praying, but not like any prayer I had known. By your light, O Emperor, see me. By your hand, guide me. Do not grant salvation, but victory. Give me power over the broken suns. Let me wield this shard as your weapon. Let me be the hand that strikes, even if my soul burns for it. His voice cracked on the last words. It was desperation and exaltation in one. A zealot's hunger poured into every syllable. I staggered back, bile in my throat. He wasn't praying for salvation. He was praying for dominion, begging the Emperor to sanctify blasphemy. Isolde found me soon after. She was pale, trembling, blood still caked at the corners of her mouth. The talk around her throat sparked feebly, its punishment dulled by the warp's interference. She gripped my arm with strength that belied her frail frame. "Varos," she whispered, her voice raw, urgent. "We have to end it. The heart must be destroyed. If it stays, if he keeps feeding it, this ship will not just die. It will transform." I shook my head, throat dry. "He'll kill us both if we try." Her gaze bored into me, unblinking, hollow with certainty. "Then we die. Better that than what comes." I wanted to deny her, to call it madness, but I'd seen too much. The crewman who slit his own throat because the stars were inside him. The way the walls bled crystal. The way Marin's shadow now lingered a half-beat longer than his own steps. Still, part of me hesitated. Marin had given me a chance when I should have died with my Navy ship. He had spared me when he didn't have to. A twisted form of loyalty gnawed at me, whispering that perhaps following him meant survival. Perhaps his madness was the only shield left. That thought died with the next scream. We found the bodies in the lower hold. 2 crewmen, their armor peeled back like fruit skins. Their bones had been drawn out of their flesh and reassembled into crystalline lattice, hanging like grotesque chandeliers from the ceiling. The creatures had stalked them in silence, leaving no trace but the sculptures of their deaths. Brel was among them, his plated grin frozen forever, his jaw fused into a jagged crystal maw. Isolde wept silently, not from grief, but from dread. "Do you see? They're not hunting anymore. They're building." The corridors shook. From somewhere deep in the ship came a thunderous crack, like the sound of a star shattering. Vox units flared with static, repeating Marin's prayers in distorted echoes. Victory, victory, victory. I pressed my Aquila into my palm until the edges cut flesh, warm blood dripping down my fingers. Loyalty warred with terror. The thought of betraying Marin was an agony, but the thought of following him was worse. I looked into Isolde's pale eyes. She did not speak, but her silence screamed louder than the Vox. Something had to be done, and the horrors outside the captain's quarters prowled ever closer, their eyeless faces pressed against the bulkheads, waiting for the command to strike. The bridge was a tomb before the end began. Panels flickered in fractured colors, their machine spirits keening like wounded animals. Blood streaked the consoles, pooled in the corners, still wet from the last slaughter, and in the center stood Meren, his prize clutched to his chest, the Prism Heart pulsing against him like a second organ. The horrors came with the hum. They poured in from the corridors, crawling through shattered bulkheads and dripping from the walls like glass sweat, eyeless, jagged, their maws splitting their torsos in perfect reflection of the relic. They did not rush us. They gathered, encircling, waiting, as though knowing the moment was theirs already. Isolde stood beside me, her collar sparking faintly. Blood streaked her pale face, but her eyes were steady, locked on Meren. "It's already too late," she whispered. "He's chosen." "Chosen," I rasped, but the answer came not from her. Meren laughed. A sound half exultation, half ragged plea. His hand stroked the Prism Heart, the fractured light spilling over him like a benediction. "Do you see it, Varos? It speaks to me. It shows me victory. With this shard I am not captain, I am prophet." The heart pulsed again, and his flesh shuddered. At first it was small, a ripple across his hand where he gripped the sarcophagus. The skin darkened, splitting as slivers of crystal pushed outward, piercing through nail and knuckle. He didn't flinch. He smiled. "Emperor, bear witness," he cried, his voice breaking into static as the vox caught the hum. "Not salvation, ascendance." The fissures spread. His arm crystallized from the inside out, veins filling with jagged light until the flesh split entirely, glass veins replacing sinew. His metals clattered to the deck as his chest convulsed, ribs warping, splitting to make space for something harder, sharper. He dropped to his knees, clutching the heart tighter as it fused to him. The chains that had once bound it snapped free, sinking into his torso like veins, stitching into a new host. Blood poured down his coat, then hardened mid-fall into glittering shards. "Captain!" My voice cracked. I don't know why I called to him. Habit, loyalty, or the faintest hope. He looked at me then, and his eyes were gone. In their place, 2 fractured shards gleamed, reflecting me back 100-fold, each reflection screaming. The bridge quaked. The horrors howled, their screeches rising in triumph as their shapes bent toward him, as though saluting their sire. Isolde's hand gripped mine, dragging me toward the engine controls. "Varos, listen to me. The core. You have to detonate it." "The warp core?" My throat locked. "It'll kill us all." "It's the only way." Her voice didn't tremble. "If he becomes the host, there won't be a ship left to kill. There'll only be him." Behind us, Meren rose, his body grotesquely fused with crystal. His jaw split open, stretching down his throat into a vertical maw, mirroring the horrors at his command. His voice came out as a chorus, dozens of fractured tones. "I am the shard. I am the hand of the broken suns. I am whole." He stepped forward, each movement splitting the deck beneath him, crystal veins sprouting with every footfall. The creatures converged, their screeches building into a symphony of shattering glass. Isolde pushed me to the console, her bloodied hand leaving a smear on my armor. "Varos, do it." My hands shook as I keyed the override. Warnings screamed across the screens. Core breach imminent, containment failing, warp instability rising. I prayed not for salvation, not even for mercy, but for the strength to press the final rune. Isolde turned back toward Meren, her eyes blazing with defiance. She flung her arms wide, talk sparking violently, as she unleashed a surge of psychic force, her scream shaking the walls. The creatures faltered, shrieking as the pressure slammed into them. She looked back at me once, her lips forming silent words I'll never forget. "Go." I slammed the rune. The core howled, a thunderclap of energy tearing through the Revenant. Bulkheads split, plasma flared, reality itself seemed to shear apart. I was thrown from the console, hurled toward the lifepod bay as the deck fractured beneath me. By some cruel mercy, one pod still clung to its harness. I staggered inside, blood streaming from my nose and ears, slammed the hatch, and prayed. Through the viewport I saw the bridge one last time. Meron, now fully shard host, towering above the collapsing deck, his maw splitting wide as crystal spires pierced upward. Isolde stood before him, her body breaking apart under the strain, but her scream still holding him back for one final heartbeat. Then the Revenant detonated. The explosion tore across the void, a sun blooming where none had shone for millennia. Shards of crystal and steel spiraled outward, carried on the screams of a ship dying in agony. My pod spun free, tumbling end over end into the fractured dark. I don't know how long I screamed. But when silence finally came, it was worse than the noise. I do not remember the hours after the Revenant died. Only fire, only light, only the scream of metal becoming crystal, of men becoming shards. Only Meron's voice, breaking into 100 fractured tones, echoing through the void as the warp tore him apart and remade him into something too terrible to endure. Then nothing. When awareness returned, I was weightless in the dark. The lifepod's lumen flickered, dim and feeble, its machine spirit rattling like an old man's breath. The walls were cold to the touch, moisture beading from the failing systems. The view slit showed only the scattered remains of the Revenant. Steel twisted into impossible geometries, crystal shards spinning slowly through the void. They glimmered faintly, catching the distant starlight in jagged refractions. I floated there for days, perhaps weeks. Time dissolved into silence, and the sound of my own breathing. My ration pack dwindled to crumbs, the water recycler clogged with frost. More than once I considered opening the hatch, letting the void take me. But always I stopped, because I swore I could still hear it. The Prism Heart, the hum, the fractured chorus, in my bones, in my teeth, in the pulse behind my eyes. I told myself it was memory, shock, trauma. But sometimes when the pod drifted just right, I swore the stars themselves leaned closer, shards tilting in the heavens, watching. I prayed. Oh, throne, I prayed more than I ever had in my life, clutching the cracked aquila I had taken from the derelict, pressing it to my forehead until the edges cut my skin. My blood slicked the symbol, staining the twin heads, but I prayed anyway. Not for salvation, not even for forgiveness, only for silence. Silence never came. Rescue found me not by miracle, but by accident. A pilgrim vessel, battered and crowded, drawn off course by some misaligned augurs, caught my pod's weak distress signal. Their shuttle hooked me from the void and dragged me aboard, their crew murmuring prayers of thanks, as if saving me were part of their emperor-given duty. I wanted to thank them. I wanted to kneel and weep. Instead, I collapsed on their deck, words failing me, my throat nothing but raw sound. They carried me among their number, men, women, children, all bound for holy shrines near the moor. They smelled of sweat and incense, their robes patched, their faces gaunt but bright with faith. They whispered blessings over me, as though my survival was divine. If only they knew. I spoke little during the voyage. When pressed, I told them my ship was destroyed by raiders, nothing more. They nodded, clucked their tongues, muttered curses at the cruelty of pirates. But some looked at me strangely, as if sensing the truth I dared not share. One old woman touched my arm as I lay in a cot, her hands gnarled like roots. "Your eyes," she whispered. "You've seen the void look back." I did not answer. I could not. Weeks later, the pilgrim vessel docked at Footfall. I staggered from its airlocks like a man risen from the grave, gaunt, my hair streaked with white though I had not been so long away. The cacophony of the station hit me like a storm, the bellow of merchants, the hiss of incense burners, the clash of steel against steel in the fighting pits. Life roared all around me, loud and hot and real, but I felt nothing. I found a cantina in the shadow of the promenade, a dingy hole where voidsmen drank to forget. I took a seat at the corner table, my aquila clutched in my hand, a cup of tar-black amasec untouched before me. The cracked cymbal bit into my palm, grounding me. Without it, I feared I would float away into madness. I tried not to listen, but in a place like Footfall, rumors spill like blood in the pits. Whole colony gone dark. A trader muttered at the bar, his voice hushed but urgent. Ghast's reach. No vox, no trade, no survivors. Just silence. His companion spat. Another plague, maybe. Or raiders. Happens all the time. The trader shook his head. Not like this. Witness ship swears the stars themselves fractured overhead. Prism light, bending wrong. Same as the ghoul stars. Another voice joined, low and fearful. Not just Ghast's reach. 2 more outposts gone quiet near the shattered stars. They say the suns there are bleeding. Bleeding suns, shattered constellations, prisms humming across the void. I gripped the aquila harder, my hand trembling. Destroying the Revenant had not ended it. Perhaps it had only freed it. The Prism Heart had been a shard, a fragment, and we had broken its chains, carried it from its tomb, bled it into the warp. What if Merrin had been right? What if it had been waiting for someone mad enough to unbind it? I thought of his final words, his body warping into crystal, his voice breaking into 100 screaming reflections. I am the shard. I am the hand of the broken suns. I am whole. Was that his death cry? Or his birth? I drained the amasec in one burning gulp, but it did nothing. The taste was ash, the warmth fleeting. My reflection in the cup lingered too long, lips still moving after mine had stilled. I shoved it away, bile rising. I stumbled to a viewport, needing air, needing space. Footfall's battered spires jutted around me, chained asteroids glimmering with sickly lights. Beyond lay the void, vast and endless, the stars scattered across its canvas. I froze. The constellations shimmered, not like heat haze, not like distance. They shimmered like shards of glass, light bending in wrong angles, fragments sliding against one another. For a moment, I swore I saw eyes in the heavens, glinting, unblinking, watching. The aquila slipped from my hand. It struck the deck with a dull clang, cracked cymbal staring up at me like a corpse's grin. My knees buckled, my breath caught. The shattered stars are not broken, they are watching, and they remember me. Thus ends tonight's tale, whispered from the void beyond the Emperor's light. A tale of broken suns and of hungers that stir in silence, waiting for the bold, the greedy, the desperate to unseal them. Varos lived to tell his account, but survival is not victory. Some wounds linger long after the blood is gone. Some stars shine not with light, but with memory, and with intent. The shattered stars remain. They are not broken. They are watching. And one day their gaze may fall on you. If this story has unsettled your soul and left you searching the shadows, steel yourself and join us again. Subscribe to Voidborn Terrors, sound the bell of vigilance, and prepare. For in the darkness of the 41st millennium, the next horror always waits just beyond the light. Dare you look into the abyss with us once more?